Okay. Again, good evening, good morning, and good day, because we have all from 3 time zones. Welcome to this session. Good to see you all again. So this is the fourth part and the final part in our map, so to say, of the boat metaphor. So it's on adjusting the sails and rudders. Again, quick recap. We talked about, we are moving from dark age to light age. Light is increasing, consciousness is increasing, and we could see around us and all over the world. But there is turbulence at the surface, though there is a positive deep transformation taking place. So how to navigate through that turbulence? And best way to navigate through that turbulence is to move towards and operate from the eye of the storm rather than being caught up in the periphery of the storm. And there are many ways to look at that. That's how we are exploring that. And we use this metaphor of the boat, and we looked at moving towards the eye of the storm is actually operating from a stillness or a calmness and not getting perturbed by what's happening around and being centered within us. And for that, we said it's like we use our own vehicle, which is like the Panchakoshas, taking that as the metaphor. And we looked at what is the characteristic of that Panchakoshas, what are the controls, how to access them, all those things in the last session. And then how to fire the engines, Jnana, Bhakti, Karma, Kriya engines or the marg or path. And then we looked at releasing the anchors, the fears, desires, emotions, limiting beliefs, etc. So today we look at adjusting the sails and rudders. So this is about, in fact, today's session, I'm most nervous because it's very subtle and hope I'll be able to communicate it in an understandable way. So we'll be dealing with, first thing is awareness. That means if you have to adjust our sails and rudders, we need to be aware of where are we heading towards, what is the North Star, what is the vision, where should be going actually. That's the first step. Then acceptance, which is about we accept the wind and the undercurrents, we can't fight them. Then adjust the sails and rudders, right? Then alignment, how do we align ourselves with that? And through that, we get into a flow. So that's the aspect of topic today we will be looking at. So starting with awareness. So before adjusting the sails and rudders, we need to be aware of where is the North Star, what is the vision, which direction to go, which way is the destination, how are the winds and currents in the ocean. So this is the first very important part. If you get this wrong, we'll be maybe heading in a wrong way. So I says direction is more important than speed. Otherwise, we may be running very fast, but in a wrong way. Then it's even more dangerous. We have to, come back that much more actually, right? So if you have to understand where to go first, that comes from this awareness, our perception of what is this existence and who are we. And we have been looking at this map of, kind of representing where we are when, where we need to go, and where the majority of the people on the planet are, going or running towards. So a lot of that is happening going outward, and we are saying we need to go inward really to go to the real destination, that is which is more important. Why they are going outward is in the dark age, the visibility has reduced because there is less light and our perceptions are only based on 5 senses, and we see whatever is perceived by these 5 senses as the truth. And that's why people think that that's it. And if my life purpose is to maximize, whatever I can achieve in this five sensory physical world, that's why there is whole aspect of, you just exploit as much as possible the planet, you know consume more. Whole economy is consumption led economy. Can you imagine that? If somebody eats more, we call them healthy. That's how our economy is right now. If you consume more, we say, yeah, developed country. Consume more. If consumption falls, we say, oh, economy is going bad. And we say grabbing most, holding more, hoarding most is success. That's all because the humanity has lost the vision in the dark age. And that's why we are running very fast, actually, in a wrong direction. Whereas the truth from Vedas and Upanishads show us, which have come from the higher consciousness states, that truth is actually going inward, where it's talk about just one consciousness. We are not this body mind perception. We are beyond that. It's one consciousness. So this is the first thing to recognize. We may not understand or realize as such, but even if it's a hypothesis, I think let's start with that. Then we'll see what we can do with that. So what does the highest life vision purpose, the Vedas and Upanishads point to, is this. They say Atmano Mokshartam Jagad Hitaya Cha is the real purpose of life. This is from Rigveda. What it means is Atmano Mokshartam, that means one's own self-realization, and Jagad Hitaya, helping others, helping the whole planet. Jagat, not just human beings or plants or animals, entire planet, Jagat. Not even planet actually, it's actually beyond. You can imagine what's the grandness of this vision, and one statement. So all other family, social, professional aspects are to support this vision. They are the means, not the goal. But we have made them as the goal because in the dark age, we are running towards that left. That's only a means. So what is self-realization? What are we looking at liberation from? Liberation from what? So self-realization is essentially what Upanishads are showing, is that you are already God. You have to just realize that. That's it. That is self-realization. Because you are already this one consciousness. We feel we are separate, individual entities. So liberation is essentially liberation from this ignorance that we are this small body-mind entity. That's the liberation. In fact, Vivekananda made this as the tagline of Ramakrishna Ashram. If you look at Ramakrishna Ashram, below that emblem, you will see this, Atmano Mokshartam Jagadhitaya Cha. That's the motto of Ramakrishna Ashram. So some of the Mahavakyas, what they call big statements from Upanishads about truth. This is from many Upanishads. In fact, all Upanishads talk about the same thing, but in a very different ways, so that people can connect to it. So they are looking at absolute truth, and it's eternal. Whatever changes with time and space is not truth. For example, if something is true today, it was not true yesterday, that means it's not true. Or it is true today, it was not true 1,000 years back, that means it's not true. Or the other way also, it was true 1,000 years back, it's not true now, that means it's not true. Also, with respect to space, if you say it is true in India, it's not true in somewhere else, that's not true. It's true on land, it's not true inside ocean, then it's not true. It is true on earth, it is not true on space, again it's not truth. So Upanishad is pointing to something as absolute truth, which is eternal, irrespective of time and space. Because in fact, time and space is an illusion created by this body and mind complex. That's why it's not true. In fact, modern science has coming closer to that, right? Einstein is showing that it's all relative. Time and space is relative, it's not absolute. In fact, Upanishads are asking the highest question. They ask about what is that one thing by knowing which I can understand everything else. It's like science is trying to figure out one unified theory, right? So Upanishads are already showing that. So some of those big statements, Brahma Satya Jagat Mithya, that means consciousness is truth, physical world is untruth, or it's relative truth. It looks to be like this, but it's not really like that. Jagat means that whatever moves, whatever changes. So whatever moves, whatever changes is not truth. Whatever is permanent, that's the only truth. That is Brahman or consciousness. Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahman. I am God consciousness. This is another statement. Again, it's not like an arrogance, but it's realization that Tattvamasi, that the what? You are that whole existence. This is another statement. Isha Vasyam Idam Sarvam. Everything is Isha, consciousness. Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. Truth is only one, but the learned talk about it in many ways. So like that, Upanishads has many statements like this and lot of proof or how to realize this, all those kind of directions. If that is so, but why we don't perceive it so? In our day-to-day living life, we don't perceive it like that, right? We think this physical objects and world is the real. And Upanishads say because it's because of ignorance. So how to then get realized is through knowledge, because knowledge can remove ignorance. So they give some analogy. For example, we mistake rope as a snake. Then whole problem starts. We get frightened, we'll be very afraid, we start running, we're looking for a weapon to kill that snake. So many things can happen. And then we suddenly realize that, oh, it's just a rope. Whole thing has vanished, right? So it's exactly like that, they say. It is an error in our understanding. So if you have to remove ignorance, just the knowledge, a spark of knowledge can do that. That's why they say. So it's not about, for example, how do you remove darkness? You don't keep on pushing darkness. No, you just light a lamp, just fire just one thing, whole darkness is gone. That's the approach Upanishads talk about. So let's explore a little bit more on this aspect, what the Upanishads are saying. I'm taking a metaphor again today. So have you experienced virtual reality? We all have experienced it. For example, TVs, movies in the theater. They're not real, we know that, right? But we experience as if it's real. We cry, we laugh, and we go through all the emotions. In fact, blood pressures change. So many things happen in the body as well, actually. You might have heard about sixth sensor. There are now devices. They tie it to the back, and there are a lot of probes connect to the head, and it actually directly feeds electromagnetic waves to the brains, and we get a very different view of the world. And there are this virtual reality gadget. For example, I'm showing here one. You can view this link when I send the presentation. Here, this person is wearing that gadget, and there are a lot of modes in this. You can select which game to play. Here, he's playing a table tennis in this right side window. So he gets a room, he gets a table tennis table here, He gets a table tennis bat on his hand and a ball, ping pong ball. Then he starts playing, and there is an opponent who pushes the ball again. So he actually plays the table tennis through this gadget. But there is no real table there. There is no real ball. There is no table tennis bat. There is no room. But if it appears to be so real, you can play, you can interact with that. If you switch to another game, you can play a boxing game with this person. You know, you will get a hit. You will also feel a vibration in your head. All the simulation. You will see this, hear the sound, and you will see the room here, and this boxing arena. So it's almost like a real, but this is virtual real, because we know if you remove that gadget, we know there's a different world out here. Now imagine this virtual reality gadget is stuck to his head like this right from birth, and then this person hasn't seen anything outside the world. So his reality of the world is only whatever is projected in that virtual reality gadget. It's like Kupa Munduka, in Sanskrit. The frogs in the well think that that's all the world is. In fact, that's what is happening to us, because our body-mind complex is a virtual reality gadget. So if you look at, really pay attention a little bit more, in fact, this is what the Advaita Vedanta looks at. It actually takes our day-to-day experience and starts asking questions which we just take it for granted. So look at what happens. We have these 5 sensors, and they feed signal to our brain, that we know, right? So for example, eyes can see only so much of the electromagnetic spectrum. We know that, right? We can't see infrared, we can't see ultraviolet, and beyond that, rest of the electromagnetic spectrum. It is such a narrow band of light our eyes can see. Our ears can hear only 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. In fact, dogs and bats can hear more than us. And what we smell, also limited. Dogs can sniff much better than us. Like that, all the 5 sensors give us a filtered view of this outside world. It's a very narrow band, actually. And through that, we keep capturing data. And we accumulate a lot of data in our CPU memories. And then we keep processing that data. All of our thinking is actually recycling of that data. Actually, incidents just happen and just they go off, but they just get stuck in our head because we store it, we put it in our memory, and we generate more data out of that. We analyze that, we project it, we imagine things, and we worry about it, we create fears, we just blow it up. So we keep creating more software and data. And as a software, we start building logic out of that data. We start saying, this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong, I like this, I hate this. These are all logic that is actually software. So we come with some boot software and some boot memory. Then we keep on building. That's why if you look at, we'll see one more step and then we'll come back there. And then with this increased data and software, we keep filtering even more from this, our sensors. Look at that. If you notice very young children, they are very open. They see everything as they are actually. As we grow up, we become so, filtered views, conditionally hearing, conditionally seeing, right? Even if so many things happening, we only see this much. That's because we get conditioned like this. In fact, all this data, software, memory, all these things are actually a karma, because it's just impressions, not just in our hardware like this. It gets imprinted in all our panchakoshas actually. So data is not just in our head. Now look one more thing. We look at this, say, red cube. We take it for so granted, right? Oh, it's a red cube, it's a solid object. But now pay a little bit more attention. What happens? What is really happening is white light is falling on this object. Red light gets reflected because others gets absorbed. And then that falls on the retina. So if you look at here, no object is going in, okay? Light is going inside the eye. And light is getting converted to electrical signal from the eye to the brain. So what reaches the brain is electrical signal. And then mind interprets, this is red, this is cube, because we have stored data and we have interpretation of that. So now what is reality here? Is this a red object really? Just think about that. Now, if you look at modern science, at an atomic level, everything is same. And everything is manifestation of same energy. There are electromagnetic waves here, everywhere. But none of these are in our perception because all these sensors cannot perceive that. So, in fact, our sensors are actually fooling us. So, but why we don't experience it that way? Because everybody has similar VR gadget, body mind. So we feel it's an universal truth. All are getting fooled actually. So we don't realize that. And from birth to death, we are fitted with this VR gadget. So we don't know anything outside of this. And this is called Maya in Indian system. We think this is real, but that is not actually real. It appears to be real. And this is what the Upanishads point us actually. Look here, go deeper, introspect. So we'll look at few things to get a little bit more understanding of this. If you understand birth and death, we'll get a lot more insights. Again, birth and death are not understood in modern science and even in modern medicine, right? We don't know what is life actually. And what yogic science show is that how the birth happens. There is a genetic inheritance from the sperm and egg from parents, the DNA and the whole body propagation. And around 40 to 45 days after conceiving, soul enters. You can say life force or whatever. And the combination of these actually makes a person. That's why in all civilizations and religions, abortion after this period is considered equivalent to murder because you are preventing a life coming into an existence. In fact, now there is a TED video. I've given a link here. It's from NASA, who have created a visualization of conception of that sperm and egg, that to a baby coming out actually, up to that complete visualization. And you can notice that around this 40 to 45 days, the heart starts beating. It's like a clock. In computers, there is a clock, right? And clock is the one which drives everything. If the clock stops, the whole computer stops. It is very similar to like that. Whole new life starts there. Until then, the fetus is just a mass of flesh in the mother's womb. And when this new life enters, a new life starts there actually. In fact, that's why that's the period where pregnant women go through certain phenomenal changes. They experience vomiting sensations because body feels there is an external entity. Should I reject it? And likelihood of abortions are high during those periods because if mother rejects it or baby rejects it, they may separate actually. And one more part of the science they talk about is that children choose parents. That means the soul chooses which parents and which part of the world to be born, not by thinking, but what is called by tendencies, what are called vasanas. That means they are basically the karma or impressions in the subtle body. We saw in one of the previous sessions that we don't die, we change the gross body, right, in the Panchakoshas. The subtle body continues, and that subtle body seeks a new gross body. And that seeking is through it is karma or impressions or vasanas. For example, if there are certain strong desires, it seeks to fulfill that. If there are strong repulsions, it tends to, undo that karma. So that's why it chooses a parent or a place so that it actually can, dissolve that karma. Because whole nature is built towards propagating us into the higher consciousness states. Actually, it's pushing us. Now let's look at death. This is a phenomenal book by Sadhguru, Death. In fact, there are a lot of ancient scripts, for example, Garuda Purana, etc., which talk about the whole entire process of death, what happens after death and all. But they are described in a very mystical way. So people think it's all, superstitious, etc. Sadhguru has described in a very more modern contextual way, more so-called logical, rational, scientific way, you can say. And it's a phenomenal book. He has written the whole process of death. In fact, he says death is not an instance. Death is a process. Actually, it takes about 14 days for every aspect of the death to complete. That's why there are so many death rituals. And what happens after death? The subtle body, what happens to that? All those kind of things, okay? This is a phenomenal book. Some people may get scared by reading it. But if you just cross that, you can get over the fear of death, because then you know what is really truth. Because death is an illusion. I have given few modern neuroscientists' experiences. I think some of might have seen it, because even the previous sessions I have talked about that. So in a sense, accidentally, these people like Jill Bolte Taylor, Anita Moorjani, or Eben Alexander, they accidentally removed their virtual reality gadget and they experienced the existence. But Upanishads and yogic sciences show that there is a method we can actually experience it as we are through this virtual reality gadget in a conscious way. And now modern biology, there is a field called biology of transience. They are saying death is an illusion. So Upanishads, Advaita Vedanta, they are the highest science on the ultimate truth, because they talk about Advaita. There is no dual, there is only one. When there is only one, everything stops there, right? There is no more knowing. Knowing comes if there is a knower and something to be known. There is no more knowing, and there is no more doing, because there is only one. There is no more to get, nothing to do, nothing to get, because you are complete already. It is infinite. And it's a shift from object to subject. We'll see some of that. That's why I said this is a very subtle topic. We are so conditioned to look at objects because our sensory perception is outward. All our senses are outward, if you notice. Even if a small ant crawls on our skin, we'll just immediately notice that. Whereas there is so much blood is flowing inside, we won't even notice that, because our sensors are, turned outward. So we are looking at everything as an object, and we are seeking even our realization has to be another object. Otherwise, our mind doesn't think that, oh, we are getting it. That's the problem, actually. Whereas whole Upanishads is shifting it from looking at an object to look at subject. Who is looking at it? Turn the focus. into what you are looking at, into who is looking at. So shift from what is it to who am I. In fact, Sri Ravi Shankar put it nicely. He said modern science is what is it. Spiritual science is who am I. That's why modern science is exploring outside, what is inside this object, what is inside this atom, what is inside these subatomic particles, what is out in the space. It's just going outward. Spiritual science is who am I, who is looking at, who is asking this question. That is even more important. And Upanishads talk about universal oneness, one consciousness. In my exploration, I have found Swami Sarvapriyananda. He's the head of Ramakrishna Ashram, New York. He's the most, what should I say, extremely good speaker on this. I think he's realized, because otherwise you can't talk such subtle things. And the way he can express it is phenomenally good. So I have given few of his talks. In fact, I would highly recommend this for you to watch, Yoga of Self-Inquiry. It's a 1 hour talk. In 1 hour, he gives the entire gist of Advaita Vedanta. And it's very convincing. If you watch that, you will see, yes, this is actually the truth. So I have given 2 more Kena Upanishads. It's also very good. It's actually, Kena means what is that which is propelling everything? What is it which is making me to see? What is it which is making me to hear? Like that you go inside. In a sense, who am I actually? And then Mandukya Upanishads. This is analyzing the states of mind. It's so scientific actually. So it looks at our wake state, our dream state, and our deep sleep state. I, as a waker, I am experiencing this appearance of this world through my sense organs. So it's all projected outward. My ego, which is I as in my identification, mind, intellect, everything is turned outward. And during my dream state, all of them are turned inward. My input, output are shut down, but I experience everything right inside. In the dreams, it's look like almost real. I am there, the whole world is there, other people, objects, animals, everything is there. And in the deep sleep state, all of them vanish. It's a formless consciousness, limitless bliss. That's why deep sleep is so refreshing. Many times you won't even get deep sleep actually. That's the problem. And now, beautiful thing about Upanishads, Mandukya Upanishads is now it says to reflect who is experiencing this, all the 3 states. There is something which is actually experiencing this or witnessing this, including the deep sleep. In the deep sleep, as it's happening, we may not be aware. We are not aware in a mind way actually. That's why we don't convince that I was there in. But after waking up, we say, it was such a deep sleep. It was blissful sleep, right? That means I was there to experience it. So this common thing, which is witnessing all these things, is called Turiya, which is called the 4th state. Turiya means 4th. It's not actually the 4th state. It is the common state, which is experiencing all these things. And Mandukya Upanishads points that is real you. All other things are actually the projections out of this mind body virtual reality gadget. This is the smallest Upanishad. In fact, there are only 12 shlokas, but most profound. In fact, if you become aware during deep sleep, you will get enlightened, because then you will know what is my reality, the truth. So we go through every night, but we don't pay attention to this. Adi Shankara is a great yogi who has brought again Vedanta into more, what should I say, to this world in a more digestible way, about almost like 1300, 1400 years back. So his Nirvana Shatakam, Mano Buddhi Ahankara Chittani Naham. That means I'm not the mind, I'm not the buddhi, I'm not the ego, I'm not the memory. Chidananda Rupa Shivoham Shivoham. I'm of the nature of Shiva. That means consciousness. Like that, this whole shloka is about negating. That means I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this. Then you realize what is left is actually me. That's nothing but that witness. Drigdrishya Viveka is another fantastic way. These are all different ways the Upanishads approach. Drigdrishya Viveka, Drigdrishya, that means seer and the seen. So if you go on observing, for example, we observe objects outside, who is seeing it? If you ask that first question, eyes are seeing it. Then if you go inside and say, who is aware of the eye? That eye is seeing it. Mind is aware of eye. That means mind is the subject, eye is the object. If you go one more step, who is aware that mind is thinking? There are thoughts in the mind. That is the witness. And that is real you. So it really goes like that. So this is all about the awareness part, which I mentioned in the, adjusting the sails and rudders. First step, awareness. If you get this awareness, if you get it, actually everything is over. But it doesn't happen so quickly because we are so conditioned with the outside. So the second was on acceptance. Acceptance, first step I would say, accept the Upanishadic truths, even if it is at a hypothesis to begin with. Modern science, proof first, then belief. Again, these are all Ravi Shankar statements, very nice statements. Proof is first, then belief. Spiritual science, belief first, then proof. See, in modern science, you show me, then I'll believe, because we trust only our sensors. In spiritual science, you believe first, then only you take some steps, then you experience, because these are all subjective experiences. It is inside you. Nobody else can show it. That's why you have to start with a belief, but you can't get stuck with belief. Then it becomes a blind faith. Then accept winds and currents as they are. Obviously, right? We can't change the winds and currents in the ocean. What it means is that accept people and situations as they are. This is easier said than done. This doesn't mean that we become submissive. This only says that we recognize that it is like that. When you accept it like that, actually it liberates us to act in a composed way. Expect less, accept more. This is actually very, very powerful. All our problems actually come from the expectation. I'll show some examples now. See, what we resist persists. Again, Ravi Shankar statements. So we expect a lot of things, and then when it doesn't happen, we resist that. And what we resist persists in our mind. For example, you'll just look at it. Somebody gives you 10 praises, 10 compliments, and makes one negative comment. What stays in your mind? Right? That one negative comment stays mostly even for years actually. Because that 10 compliments, 10 praises, we readily accept. And what we accept dissolves. What we resist persists in our mind. This is very, very important. In fact, that causes karma. That's why more karma happens not by attachment alone, by repulsion, what we hate, what we dislike. Actually, that creates even more karma because it stays in our mind even more because we resist that. Actually, our enemies create more karma within us than our friends. Not because of them, but because of us only. Problems are inevitable, suffering is optional. Another wonderful statement. Because outside, the wind and currents, they happen. We can't change them. But suffering is caused within us, by us. Just like somebody criticizes us, for example, it is just one moment that's over. It's gone. It's past actually. And it's not there anymore. But it just stays in our memory. And we create suffering out of that. We create more data, more software, you know. So suffering is really our own creation. That's why it's optional actually. That happens again because we don't accept, we expect. Expectations are like filters. You know, you look at this. When you have a lot of expectations, we only look for that. So many good things may be coming in our life, we don't even notice that actually. When you are very feverish to get something, that's why normally we won't get it, because it will be coming in very different ways and we won't even recognize that. In fact, this is one of the lot of coaching issues we deal with in our leadership management coaching. People say, I'm not getting promotion, I'm not getting salary increase, because so they're so feverish. And in that process, actually, they are missing out something which is coming as an opportunities. So expectations act like filters. So if you be open, there may be a lot more opportunities just coming in. Actions coming out of expectations are impure. Right now, our actions are coming out of either fear or greed, you know, stick or carrot in this physical world. That is rajas or tamas. Whereas actions out of sattva or the sattva guna, which you can say, there is no English translation, are expressions of joy or love. They are not an action to get something or do something, or it's just an action. That's why Krishna says, no, karmanye va adhikarasya ma phaleshu kadachana. That means not seeking the fruits of action, just doing the action, and then accept whatever comes out of that. I thought I'll just take this example of mango tree. You know, nature is like that actually. For example, mango tree doesn't give fruits, saying that, oh, if I don't give mangoes, the farmer will not put fertilizer, so let me give some mangoes. Or it doesn't think that he didn't put proper water, I'll not give mangoes this year. Nothing like that. It doesn't say, oh, I'll set a target. This year I'll produce 100 quintal mangoes. Nothing like that. It's just an expression of joy, actually, nature. It is coming from that purity, sattva. Okay, that is about acceptance. Now, the third point in the, so this is all a part of adjusting our rudders and sails. Are you noticing that? That means it's all in our control. We can do that. Whereas winds and current, we can't change. The next one is on alignment. Now, our vehicle is a multi-mode vehicle. Now it has become a rocket actually, okay, from the boat. You know how a rocket launches the satellite? I know Shashikala is from ISRO. I should be careful now. You know how the rocket launch happens from liftoff? There are multiple stages where different engines fire and the previous engines or whichever propelled it actually falls off. It is very important. If it hangs on there, actually rocket cannot go up. It will fall off. That means something brought you to some altitude, then you should let it go so that the next engine can fire. So it's very similar in our context actually. We start with typically intellectually knowing whatever we are doing in this series actually is like intellectually knowing. Then experientially knowing, we feel it. Yeah, I think it is real. Then ultimately knower and knowing become one beyond experience, because all aspects of experience is at the mind and body level. But Upanishads is showing that the truth is beyond the mind. That's the orbit actually. And the earlier part of this journey is more gross. It's all about a lot of doing. And as we go up, it becomes lighter, just like this vehicle. It becomes subtle, so it's more being. That's why Suresh Ramaswamy's book, Just Be, is so good. Just be, that's it. It's at this level. Just be, and what is that? Transform your life and live as infinity, right? That's a wonderful book. So if you look at this, letting go of certain understanding and practices and embracing the next stage is very important in our journey. So it's a continuous alignment. It's not just a one-time alignment of our rudders and sails. For example, somebody who cannot focus on meditation or cannot get into meditative state because of hyperactive mind, people suggest to start with japa, for example, which is more a doing practice here. Meditation is a being state actually. So you start with this cross state. You start with japa. Once you are doing japa, actually mind starts a little bit settling down. But if you keep on doing japa lifelong, probably it will not yield. In fact, there are possibilities. Many of the great saints have done that. But that requires not just japa. They go into bhakti and understanding much more actually. So after some japa, that you could actually shift to meditation. You should shift your engine. So some practices, some understanding, you will have to let go and move to next stages. Initially, you need high thrust because of gravity, atmospheric resistance, and inertia. All that happens. Actually, that's why in this journey, initial stages are more difficult. And we keep falling back to the ground because we don't attain escape velocity. So we do attempt, we fall back, we do attempt, we fall back, because gravity, atmospheric resistance, inertia, you can relate to that. Gravity is kind of drag our karmas. Atmospheric resistance could be our social conditioning. Inertia is our own, we don't act. Especially initially, we will have to do. As our system matures, the practices become lighter and subtler. At the end, need to discard even the knowledge which brought you up to that state. So I thought this too will give a good analogy for that. Pole vault, for example, pole vault, right? Using the pole to do the high jump. Pole vault, you need at the tipping point, you need to leave the pole to cross over, right? If you hang on to the poles thinking that, this is the pole which brought me up to that height, and if you hang on to that pole, you will fall back actually. And if you release that pole even early, then also you'll fall back. So it is that right moment, you have to leave it and you cross over. It's something like that. And the analogy in Upanishads they give is thorn removing. If there's a thorn stuck in your feet, you use another thorn to remove it, right? After that, just because this thorn removed that thorn, you don't keep this thorn inside, right? The second thorn. You throw away both the thorns. So you use knowledge to remove ignorance. Then you should throw away knowledge as well as ignorance, both. Just because knowledge removed the ignorance, you don't stick that knowledge inside that, because that also doesn't lead, because knowledge means it's still in the realm of mind and body. Truth is beyond mind. Of course, these are long way to journey, but I'm just painting the whole path. But every stage you can actually see this subtle things, small things. You have to let go and get into the next mode. And this requires your own intuitive feel. Personally, for me, for example, I have gone through like Art of Living, Isha Yoga, then Kriya Yoga of Sri M. It was not like a shopping. It was actually a, I could see that it was a step improvement. It doesn't mean that I'm rejecting those gurus. It was so valid and it was so relevant, and still it is valid in many ways, but something more, something different was required in my path. And I also noticed that I used to do earlier very heavy kriyas, or rather, hatha yoga, 3 to 4 hours of sadhana, many things, and kind of it was required. Now it actually has reduced significantly. It is more subtle. Instead of a bulk at a time, it's more spread throughout the day, kind of. That's how this journey, it's a constant alignment and letting go of something gross, getting into more subtle. So this is alignment. Last one, flow. This is a typical model used in management or even psychology. There is challenge one dimension, skills one dimension. If you have high challenge and low skill, we experience anxiety because we are not capable of doing that or overcoming that challenge. And if you continue to be like that, we may get burnout. On the other hand, if there is challenge is low and we have more skill, we get boredom. It looks trivial, and we can get into stagnation. So there is a zone here, which is zone of flow. That means you keep increasing your skill, taking up higher challenge. Increase your skill, take up higher challenge. Like that, you keep moving like that. This is growth, expansion, evolution. Very similar way, even our spiritual journey. Don't create spiritual stress, burnout, boredom, stagnation. Because I used to do that, and I see many people do that, thinking that, it's something like, oh my God, I'm not able to concentrate. Oh my God, I'm not getting this enlightenment. All those kind of things. That means we are creating more stress. In fact, we are substituting from a worldly stress into a spiritual stress. Both are equally bad. We may think this is good, but what's happening is both are creating the mind equally excited. Whole idea is chitta vritti nirodha, right? Reduce the turbulence in the mind. Even this spiritual whatever, if you get into, you may create turbulence. So it is like we may think that that's good. It's like moving from an iron cage to golden cage. We may think it's good, but it's both are cage only. So this also can become bondage. In fact, I asked Sri M once how to expedite this process. He said, you can't push it. It is an organic process. It will take its own course. The best you can do is create receptivity in you, create emptiness, because then the grace fills it. That's the best way you can approach this. So we should not get stressed up. So it's being joyful, accepting, letting go, all those things, and keep moving in this flow. So balance, moderation, patience, perseverance, these are very essential. It is this balance of this zone and moderation. In fact, in yoga they say bhogi or yogi cannot become a yogi. Both are extremes. Yogi is a center, balance. So that's on the flow. So that's what I thought of discovering these 4 aspects: awareness, acceptance, alignment, flow. And there are Vedantic meditation. I am again exceeding time. This was my, what should I say, stress for doing this session. How can I cover as much as possible in a simpler way and without overloading, and also comprehensively covering? Are you all okay if I take maybe 10 more minutes? I know many of us actually hang on for some more time,
Sure.
but
Yes.
as a formal closure of this.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay, because then we can do one Vedantic meditation. Yogic meditation help us to quieten the mind, like breath watch, for example, so that when mind is quiet, we can perceive the higher things. That's very useful. Vedantic meditation, they help us to realize that knowledge. For example, we heard a lot of things, we are not this body mind, we are this one consciousness, all those kind of things. So first step is just an intellectual understanding. We looked at that proof, etc., right? It looks like, okay, maybe. So that's called Shravana. This stage is called Shravana. That means I'm hearing, I'm listening, I'm watching a video. So I'm just taking in. The second step is called Manana. Manana means I contemplate on that and see, yeah, it actually makes sense. It's real. But still, it's not my living reality. Still, I see this physical world is really living reality. So for that, Vedantic meditation, what's called Nididhyasana, is the approach, where finally it says, yes, actually this is the fact. So Vedantic meditation is, we can experience one short one today, and there are many techniques on that itself. And this can be done with open eyes also, because it's actually relating to more awareness. So what I want you to do now is that all of you look at some solid object which is in your visibility. Just look at that object and don't look at the screen now. Just look at that object and just notice how the light is falling on that object. Right? Light is falling on that object. And just become aware that that light is coming inside your eyes. Just become aware of that. Light is coming from that object into your eyes. And notice that light is coming into your eyes, not the object. And notice that your eyes is perceiving that object. And now become aware that from eye, the brain is processing that electrical signal. This we know from science. So you become aware of that. Okay, light is coming, falling on the eye. Yeah, going inside my brain. Just visualize that. And now become aware that your mind, which is thinking, which can say, I am da da da, I am Vishu. If you just say that, you become aware of that, right? That is your mind actually. So your mind is actually interpreting that object. It is of this color, of this shape, and it's giving a name and a form. It's called Nama Rupa Vyavahara. That means we give an attribute to that. And then it gets stuck in our mind, memory. Become aware of that. Now also become aware that whatever we call that as object, as a solid object, it's actually not a solid, because atomic level 99% is space, right? And we think it is a solid. Again, just become aware of that. Now close your eyes. Stop looking at the object, just close your eyes. Sit relaxed. Your shoulder, neck, just keep it loose. Just take a deep breath and exhale. Now start observing that object. Who is the seer and who is the seen? Just notice that your eyes are the seer and the object is the seen, right? Now become more aware and look at who is feeling that your eyes are seeing. Who is becoming aware that your eyes are seeing? Your mind is the seer and your eye is the object now. Just observe that. Your mind is the seer, your eye is the object. Now look at what is your mind. Your mind is nothing but thoughts actually. For example, you say, I am this person. That's a thought. You can observe that thought, right? So you can observe your mind. You can observe the thought. So who is observing that thought? Who is the witness? And that witness is actually you. Just become aware of that. The witness that you are observing, that mind, that is real you. And notice that that witness which you feel as I is unchanging. While you were very small baby, you also had that feeling I. And even when you are grown up so much, your body has changed so much, you still feel that that is same I. That means body has changed, but that I is constant. It's unchanging. And notice that that I, which is the observer of your mind, is the same when you are happy or when you are sad, when you are upset, when you are angry. That means any of these thoughts, emotions, feelings, you are the same witness. You are witnessing that. That means you are separate than those emotions, because you are the seer and mind is the object. Thoughts, emotions, feelings, they are objects. And these thoughts, emotions, feelings, they come and go like clouds in the sky. And you are unaffected by that. You as the witness consciousness is unaffected by any of those things. Be with that awareness for a minute, that you are the witness and you are observing thoughts, feelings, body, external world objects. You are the witness, Sakshi. Okay, you can slowly open your eyes. So There are many techniques you can watch. In fact, Sarvapriyananda conducts some of them. It's extremely good. So you can explore that. And this can enhance the awareness, whereas yogic meditations will help to reduce the wandering nature of the mind, which are actually like a preparation, and this will really enhance then the reality of the existence. So let me quickly close, just 3 more slides. So what happens through this process of awareness? See, in the Ashtanga Yoga, we saw that so many techniques and methods to clear all the layers of the Panchakoshas, right? And clearing the Panchakoshas is equivalent to, the clearing the muddy water and settling the wandering nature of the mind is like reducing the ripples on the surface of the water. So when the water is clean and no ripples, we can see pearls at the bottom, right? That means we can realize which is beyond this. So we understood that from a Ashtanga Yoga and other paths. Now this awareness path, how it works is through this, for example, Vedantic meditation, it works inside out. We are starting with buddhi. That means our viveka. It actually discriminates and says, yes, actually what I perceive is really false and this is real. And when the deepest level of that is convinced, it actually changes the mind, which is the outside. We saw the whole thing works from the subtle to the gross, right? In the last session. So buddhi influences manas, which influences prana, the energy body, which influences the physical body. So through this process, actually, for example, brain changes, neuroplasticity, neural pathways, changing our data and software, the analogy that we saw. All these are possible. Change in chemistry, because then it's physical level, endocrine systems, physiology, health changes. That's how it actually changes from inside out, works inside out. And there are, again, all these paths which you talked about, bhakti, jnana, karma, kriya, all of them actually help in that. And they are classified broadly into 2 kinds of this: Marjala Marga, Markata Marga. You look at how Marjala means cat, how kitten allows or surrenders to the mother to be taken away wherever, because it completely trusts the mother and says, you take me wherever is the most appropriate. In a sense, it's like surrendering to divine mother. So bhakti yoga and karma yoga are more like that actually. Bhakti is directly like that, surrendering. Karma is about not looking at the fruits of the action. Markata yoga, like monkey, if you look at, the baby monkey holds the mother, right? So jnana yoga, kriya yoga are more of that. That means we actually perform or we do sadhana. And even this Marjala Marga, it can be so powerful. I thought this could be a good example to read. The Michael Singer, he's a CEO and founder of many big software companies in US on the healthcare sector. For example, WebMD is his creation. And he's a follower of Paramahamsa Yogananda. He has written this wonderful book called The Surrender Experiment. Entire his life is everything that comes, how he surrenders to that situation, that means accepts completely, and then something more phenomenal evolves actually, rather than fighting with that. In fact, all through his year, he has life, he hasn't worked in city, he has lived in forest and created such big companies. So it's an amazing story to read. So with that, I close today's session. So essentially, we concluded this through this 3 part. We looked at what is our vehicle, the Panchakoshas, and how to use them, and through the leverages, mechanisms to use them, how to release the anchors, letting go of fears, desires, emotions, limiting beliefs, and adjusting the sails and rudders, today's session. In fact, today's is so powerful if you get it, you don't need almost the other two, because it is just like if you are able to adjust your sails and rudders so well, then the whole natural force itself will propel. Just like the wind and current itself can take you that kind of. So with that, let me stop.